We're ready to get started. I'll go ahead and kick us off. I'm very excited. Been looking forward to this one for almost the entire week. Hello everyone. My name is ARKA. I'm the managing director of the Data Economics Company, and welcome to the last day of the Data Economics Festival. If you are joining us for the first session, well, you've missed a lot, but you can learn a lot more by going to lydion.com/festival. That's lydion.com/festival, where you can find content related to the 20 plus sessions that we just ran this week. We have one more coming up on investing in data, which should be really fun. We actually have two more coming up. In addition, we've had some very fun happy hour style events, a virtual golf clinic, a live sing-along, a mixology class, and it's certainly gotten us a good opportunity to have a lot of interesting beverages over the past few days also. So almost like a real conference here. Anyway, we are very excited to bring these topics around so many different sectors and to such a broad audience on how digital data and economics are intersecting in a myriad of different ways, in a myriad of different sectors, affecting a myriad of different economic loops. And we would love to hear your feedback on the topics that we've presented, on the various discussions that we are still having today and will have later this summer on data economics, how digital technology impacts our world, and other similar topics. What we present in the near future is going to be based to a great extent on the feedback we receive. All right, so having said that, today's session is around the power of personal financial data. At the Data Economics Company, a key charter for us is identifying opportunities to use the Lydion DOS, or the Data Economic Operating System, for building solutions that we call Lydion Data Economic Solutions that are implemented as DNets or data economic networks, within which users can assetize or package up their data into a standardized format that we call Lydion data asset that lets it be valued, utilized, traded within that network, while letting all the users track exactly who uses their data, for what, ensure that the rules embedded within their data is being followed, credit for such utilizations are flowing back to the contributors, and all of these good things. Now, one of the types of problems that we are very interested in is building solutions that involve the creation of distributed databases or registries out of data sets that are completely disconnected, that don't talk to each other, are in different formats, can have differing rules of usage and credit, but can be used as a decentralized database to run queries, generate analytics, generate answers that none of these data sets, none of these data lakes, as a lot of people call them these days, could answer by themselves. Now, as a result, these can also help create marketplaces where data producers or data contributors could make heavily regulated, heavily controlled pieces or packages of their data available as Lydion data assets or in other formats that are out there, and get credit for its usage by those who are running the queries and receiving analytics and other results from this completely decentralized distributed database. Now, on Wednesday, we explored a number of very powerful use cases for such a distributed registry and query engine in the health sciences sector, in which obviously involves some of the most sensitive, regulated, and valuable data that we as people generate, data about our health and about our bodies. Another class of data that is almost as sensitive and valuable is the financial data that we generate as an outcome of our day-to-day activities. Our financial data is already being used in several ways to bring us value that go beyond just providing us with, a ledger of our financial transactions and assets. On the other hand, our financial data is also being used, not necessarily with our consent on bringing value to multiple different entities and organizations. So today, our distinguished panel of guests will help us explore the potential and power of our personal financial data, the ways that in which it's already being used to generate value for us and others, the additional new use cases that can be unlocked for consumers and companies with a regulated distributed registry of personal financial data that's completely in control of the users who are generating such data, and the concerns and guidelines that we need to be aware of when it comes to privacy and other sensitive features of the data. So in this session, I'll talk to each of our panelists in turn. And in addition to giving us a glance into their background and what it is that they are focused on these days, they will share their unique perspectives on the power of our financial data in enabling a new class of valuable assets and the challenges that lie ahead in fulfilling this potential. As each of our panelists shares their views, my request for the other panelists as well as for the audience is to note at least one question that they would like to ask another panelist, so we can go from having our perspectives shared to a rich mutual discussion. So with all that said, let's first turn to my very old friend, Vinay, whom, as we were just discussing, I've known since my undergraduate days. And over the years, 20 years almost at this point, we've had many rich conversations about several topics. And recently, we've been having several conversations on the value of personal financial data. So let's start with the basics. How would you describe the current landscape of existing business models around personal financial data? And where do you see the key opportunities where new and emerging business models might flourish?
Yep. Thanks, Orko. This is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart, and particularly passionate about data related to credit and credit worthiness. And I feel like there are lots of pain points in our system today. It's pretty broken, and lots of opportunities for new and emerging business models for this kind of data, especially on data that's used to assess creditworthiness. So I think everyone knows we have this oligopoly of these credit reporting agencies, Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion, that tracks everyone's credit scores. And there are some business practices here that just really, really need to be improved. For instance, one thing that really gets to me is that they often will match people just based on name, right? And this is one of the biggest reasons why people have bad data in their credit report. Like, you've got the same name as someone else, they've just matched on name, and in some cases, partial SSNs, like not a full SSN match, like 7 digits of the SSN. And so if you've got a really common name, like, there have been stories in the press about people whose names are things like Judy Thomas, who have terrible credit reports for no fault of their own, right? And so, and part of the reason this happens is because some really misaligned incentives here, right? A lot of the lenders, they want to avoid false positives, which is, borrowers who wouldn't have defaulted, but they denied those borrowers over false negatives, which is an approved borrower who ended up defaulting. So because with a false positive as a lender, you missed out on some potential profit, but with a false negative, you lose your entire principal. So they tend to be very aggressive in this kind of matching, and it leads to a lot of bad data in the system. And then beyond that, you've had all of these hacks, right? The Experian had one of the most damaging hacks in the history of hacks, right? In, I believe, 2017, something like 150 million people had all of their data exposed. And this is some of the most sensitive kind of data because it includes SSNs, includes like cash flow, includes everything. And then the system today, consumers can't even opt out. You can't say, hey, like, Experian screwed up my data. I want to stop them from having access to my data. That just doesn't work with our system today. And then the system is not global. So, it doesn't really work for immigrants. System is very US specific. So if you've got an immigrant who, came to the US and they have a very robust credit history somewhere else, they still have a very thin credit file here, very low credit score to start off with, and then they have to do lots of things to sort of build up their credit history in the US. And so there are newer models that have started to emerge. I think one newer model is the model of Plaid. So a lot of the newer fintechs, they actually don't use the credit reporting agencies. They just use Plaid, which connects to your bank to get all your cash flow data, which can be even richer than what the credit reporting agencies have. And Plaid has built this phenomenal business because they've perfected the art of connecting to various banks, getting data from the banks, and then reselling that data to all of these fintechs. And they've solved actually what is a very, very hard problem, because in many cases they're scraping bank websites. In some cases, they're literally getting PDFs with statements in them and scraping those PDFs to get all your cash flow data. And now slowly Plaid is transitioning more to using APIs, but I still believe the vast majority of Plaid's data is not obtained via open APIs. But the problem with Plaid too is that there's a lot of, there's a lack of transparency around how financial companies are accessing data for consumers. You don't really know, like once you let Plaid give your data to some fintech, you don't really know kind of how often they're using it, what they're using it for. So there are so many ways to kind of evolve this system and make it better. The first thing that's become clear is, just like what Plaid is doing, we need to go way beyond what the credit reporting agencies store. So a lot of data, which includes cash flow data, but also things like educational grades and transcripts, job-related data, they're all very useful in assessing someone's financial health. So I think that the system itself needs to go much beyond that, overly simplistic credit score. And then you've seen a lot of fintechs now that are using things like machine learning to assess creditworthiness. And they're using all of this data very successfully to unlock credit to a lot more consumers who may not have access to this kind of credit purely based on, that traditional credit score. So I fully believe we need to move to a new model where the data itself is like very, very multidimensional. You can have literally thousands and thousands of data points across different facets for each customer, stored in a fully encrypted way that gives customers full control over who writes to the data, right? Far more transparency, better avenues for dispute resolution. Like for instance, if you have truly defaulted on something and that has to get written to your credit report, so to speak, like how do you handle that? And then just really great data sharing between companies that may want to evaluate a consumer for credit opportunity, right? So I think there are lots of opportunities to build this kind of system, build it global from the day one, so it's not US specific or anything like that. Definite opportunities to build things like data exchanges where some of this data can be anonymized and then traded between companies. And then I'm seeing a lot of companies just like the data, economic companies sort of rise up to solve these challenges. And I think the next few years are going to be very, very exciting in this space.
Thank you, Vinay. And I'm going to come back to you. And we didn't actually learn anything about your background, which I would love to hear about and explore. Some of the thoughts that you are exploring in terms of the work that you are currently doing. But before that, I would like to go to James. And James, if you can give us a bit of your background, maybe to start off with, and then I have a specific question that I want to connect what Vinay just said, and that I want to share your way.
Yeah, thank you, ARKA. Delighted to be here today with the Data Economics Company and the festival. Has been a great week, really interesting topics, and I think this one is one that's been close to my heart for a while. As one of those immigrants that Vinay just spoke about, coming to the US and discovering that apparently I have bad credit here because I have zero credit in the US system, or had zero credit in the US system. It was a little bit of a shock to me. And in my native UK, this is a topic that I think the UK handles slightly differently. Some of the principles are similar. We can talk about this more as the conversation progresses, but it's definitely an area that globally we need to address, because there's a huge amount of financial exclusion that results from the sort of current practices that I think we can start to address. just stepping back a second, who am I? I'm James Nicholls. I lead Braithwaite. We're a boutique management consultancy. We specialize in financial services, risk management, and regulatory compliance. So we are the geeks who read everything that the regulators publish and help banks, investment firms, broker-dealers, exchanges understand what these rules mean for them and how they can run their business in a compliant and prudential manner.
James, thank you. And it's so interesting. I just had this, it was one of those moments a few months ago when Vinay and I started having these conversations about, the challenges that he sees and the opportunities he sees. And when he brought up the credit monitoring system, I had a flashback to about almost 2.5 years ago now, when you were just starting Breathwaite. And we had that conversation where you were extremely interested in a higher resolution credit system, because you were literally going through this problem that you just described to us. And we had a fairly deep few conversations around, how something like this would work, and especially given your deep knowledge in the regulatory space. I guess that's a two-part, question and, answer with whatever, perspectives that you would want. But one part is, how have your views kind of evolved since that conversation back in like 2019 at this point, I think, especially given some of the points that Vinay just shared. And second is, when it comes, whether it's creditworthiness or some of these other interesting use cases that we're exploring around financial data, what are some of the regulatory and legal hurdles and risks that you see we will have to be aware of?
Yeah, sure. So I guess my fundamental premise hasn't changed, which is we need to go back to the future. And by that, I mean, if you went to the bank 40, 50 years ago and you wanted to get a mortgage, you sat down with a bank manager who then told you you need to bring in a whole raft of documentation that helped him or her to understand what you earned, what you spent, what assets you had, what you did as a living, some references. And you would bring this documentation in, the bank manager would huff and puff and go through the documentation and eventually get to a point where they would tell you whether they were prepared to lend you any money, and if so, how much and on what terms. Now, that system had a lot of flaws and had a lot of inherent bias in it, and it was a very conservative system generally. And what we've done over the past couple of decades is move to a system where we've replaced the bank manager's judgment with a set of, in many cases, with a single number. And as Vinay started to speak about, in some cases, we're starting to analyze cash flows, but we're still really at the very beginning of this journey. If I use Plaid to sign up to a new credit card, they're probably going to go and look at my main bank account, and they'll look at my main account, but it doesn't give them that rounded picture of my financial position that I think actually they should be using for, I like the term, high resolution credit analysis, ARKA. They're still doing pretty coarse-grained analysis, which is better than simply relying on a single credit score, but it's only really the start of the picture. And I think we have an opportunity to flip this on its head and say, let the individual own their data, let the individual present a more rounded picture of their creditworthiness, of their assets, their liabilities, their income, their expenditure, and present that in a sort of as a single package, and be able to benefit from that sort of that more rounded view they give to firms. So I'm excited about where this can go. I don't think I have all the answers in terms of how this gets built as a data asset, but I absolutely see the potential there. And I think, as privacy concerns grow, I think there's a lot of concern about how much data Plaid has and how they use that. And we've seen as well. So this is sort of something to pick up some of the regulatory dynamics. We've seen this week in the EU a new proposal for a regulation that will control the way AI is used, and this regulation in particular highlights creditworthiness or evaluation of creditworthiness as a high-risk use of AI, which I think I'd agree with, and starts to put more constraints around that. So, I think there are some very valid regulatory concerns about privacy and about how people's data is being used. And I think it's time to bring that back to the individual, to empower the individual to present a balanced and rounded picture of their own financial health.
That's fascinating, James. And I want to go to Anish in a minute, because there are a lot of very, very interesting aspects to this, which I think I'd love to explore with him. But before then, I want to go back to Vinay briefly. Vinay, if you could, you've shared some thoughts about machine learning based lending and the idea of kind of taking systems like what we are describing right now to make the access to credit, access to loans, and so on easier. Now, when you hear some of the things that James is talking about in terms of regulation and some of the challenges that you're facing firsthand potentially, if you can maybe give us a little bit of your background and what you're working on right now, how do you see these two worlds harmonizing? As James is saying, this back to the future world where we kind of need to go one step deeper and not just treat people as just a set of very fixed and clearly incomplete data points, and all the way to the other end where we want to automate a lot of these decisions and we want them to be quote unquote fair, but at the same time that fairness comes from what a machine is able to learn and interpret. So what are some of your thoughts there, as well, if you can tell us a little bit about the work you're doing right now?
Sure, sure. So right now I lead product engineering at Venmo. And so I lead all the teams that build all of Venmo's product features. So this includes our, bread and butter peer-to-peer payments features, also our banking features. We've got direct deposit, debit card, credit card. We launched crypto earlier this week. That was very exciting. And then we have a host of commerce features, like we have Pay with Venmo for checkout, business profiles for casual sellers, registered businesses to accept payments, as well as QR code payments at Walgreens, CVS, a bunch of stores. So that's what I'm doing right now. And so very much in this world of sort of fintech and credit and things like that. That said, I do want to say that everything I'm saying here, purely my own views, don't represent my employer in any way, and I'm here in a personal capacity. I think I agree with everything that James brought up. I completely agree that the way of the future with lending is going to be ML based. There are, I think the leader here is this company called Upstart, which recently IPO'd, and they're looking at over 1,600 data types per consumer to make a credit decision. And when you look at the regulatory environment around this, obviously there's a lot, because you have the Fair Credit Reporting Act, you have the Equal Opportunities to Credit Act. You want to make sure that there isn't sort of bias in those ML models and things like that. And I love the approach that Upstart took, which is from day one, they sort of invited the regulators in, and they said, we're going to work with you on this, and we're going to prove to you that these models actually unlock access to credit to more people. Like, it actually makes the system better than the previous system, and you can do that with data. And that's why these systems are getting adopted, and the regulators are 100% on board. They recently got a no action letter, which is, when you get a no action letter, it means that you have been reviewed and they're taking no action, which means they're completely on board with your business practices. So it looks like ML-based models are here to say. That said, they're not perfect, and there's sometimes like inherent biases in the data, and we need sort of the data to improve. But I do think that any company that gets into this space, like any company that maybe uses the DOS to start getting to the space, I think the number one thing you need to do is start working with the regulators from day one, as opposed to layering it on as an afterthought.
Thank you so much, Vinay, and thank you, James. That's very, very interesting. I want to go to Anish now and obviously have him introduce himself. And, really happy to have you join us, Anish. And Anish, as he's going to say, he's one of the leading minds when it comes to peer-to-peer privacy protocols. And a lot of these things we are talking about today are only going to be enabled if we have the technology backbone and the technology infrastructure and to enable it, as well as the flexibility to allow whether it is users, enterprises, banks, other financial institutions to have the guarantees and the securities that they need to be able to have control and visibility over their data in order to make a lot of these use cases a reality. And there are a lot of challenges that lie in the way from a technology perspective, in addition to what we are discussing here in terms of the policy and some of the broader architectural infrastructural issues we have to look at. So Anish, with that, I'll have you maybe introduce yourself briefly and give us your thoughts.
Sure. So I'm a reasonably old hat to this whole game. I've been in 20 years into security and cryptography. So I have 1 degree in medicine, so I understand the challenges with medical data. I have 2 degrees in mathematics. So I've gone through a lot of those things. So I used to be a retail banker. So Lloyd's, as you know, they have a big data platform. We use it for various things, which you kind of mentioned. I was involved in building that, so I know what that means. And prior to that, I was involved in the Cloudly BS. So I sat on the ISO committee. So if you find BS with my name on it. So this is like a long narrative that's been happening in front of my eyes for a very long time. And I have a lot of interest in ethics of AI. So I co-founded EthicsNet. In general, the thing I would say is the following. Data, in full honesty, like I've been involved in at least, design of one data marketplace. So first and foremost, there is no such a thing as free lunch. There's absolutely no way in hell that you can actually encrypt something and get an upside for nothing. If you want to encrypt something, you're going to cost you in multiple dimensions, okay? And effectively what you have in the world is an arbitrage between, normal machine learning algorithms, especially in some parts of the world, I shall not name them, versus other parts of the world where they care about privacy in some sense. Whether you're calling it in different senses, it doesn't really matter. It's a typical arbitrage that exists in the data world, where you have 3 things you generally require to run a machine learning arbitrage, which is essentially humans to do the machine learning models, the hardware to run it, and the data, right? And this data arbitrage is the arbitrage that's really, really, really driving the whole ecosystem. Effectively, all business models that really depend on running a data arbitrage. So if you could think of it like 2 machine learning algorithms having stochastic descent gradients, and effectively you are kind of giving it a weightage over some amount of ethics, okay? You could call it, you could define it in any arbitrary way you want, but that will give you very different places where that machine learning algorithm will end up. And the problem right now is we are in a world full of lemon market. If I spend a bunch of time on any one of you, I can tell you a whole lot about who you are, what you have done, and all your history. And I should probably warn you, when we go to the decentralized world, this is going to be worse. It's absolutely worse. And then going back to other people who are describing about regulatory compliance and things like that, as someone who have talked to a lot of the regulators, who've sat across the room with regulators, who've sat on ISO committees, who've sat on IEEE committees, I can tell you, regulation is a catch-up process, okay? We absolutely need to flip this paradigm. There is no way, okay, let me rephrase it in many ways of describing. Unless we have a time travel machine at this moment in time, the regulatory implications of what we have already done is not going to be understood by us until, the brown substance hits the rotating surface, okay? The politest way to put it. So, I would love for me from a technology perspective to have a fully homomorphic encryption that works incredibly efficiently across all things. So I could do, machine learning and stuff. Essentially, machine learning in some sense is a linear algebra operation, or the loosest sense of speaking, over some data instances, which is like a matrix, right? And in a fully homomorphic encryption, you could probably do this and get some upside. And the other thing I wanted to say was there are some technologies that are emerging in MPC space, secure multi-party compute. So you could actually have collaboration among parties involved, and that's kind of the thing you might get. And this is where people like me, where I'm building Panther protocol, is interested in. I am interested in a world where the governments of the world are interested in understanding what is happening. Allow the customers have their chance of revealing whatever they want to reveal. Okay, reveal essentially has a privacy losing function. Me revealing my 23andMe genome, would absolutely reveal everything about my Y chromosome, my dad who was passed away a long time ago, and anybody who shares that Y chromosome, right? And that implies this is if privacy leak every time somebody reveals. So we need to understand all of this. It's just like, okay, what is the regulatory burden? What is the regulatory requirement? What is the mechanism that we can get the regulators to understand and agree to? At the same time, help, because we can't have CBDCs turn up, central bank-based data currencies turn up, where all our transactions are going to be public, and we have zero privacy. Can you imagine that? I can't imagine. I really struggle to imagine it. And I have had conversations with governments where governments are oblivious to this. If you're a nation state, and if your adversary knows more about your citizens than you do, can you imagine what the state of the situation is? And this applies to all the FANGs of the world, right? So like Facebook, Amazon, and everybody else. I mean, they are adversarial. Look, it's a very simple world. You, the consumer, versus an entity that has access to data, has access to a very large chunk of hardware, or has access to people who could build models. What are they interested in? Squeezing you. It's a zero-sum game. So the question here is like, how do we flip this model? Can we actually have a game theoretic incentive mechanism where this model could be flipped, where it turns from a zero-sum game to a non-zero-sum game?
That's wow. That's a lot to unpack there, Nish. Thank you. Here's what I'd like to do. I would love for you to maybe share some of your thoughts, just to begin with, on what some of those incentive models could be, especially given the use cases that we have discussed so far. And then I would love to go back to James and Vinay for their thoughts, given what Anish has said before, just to let the audience know, we have two other virtual speakers who have pre-recorded their perspectives, and we will get to that in a little bit. But this conversation is so fascinating, I want to let it flow for a little while. So yeah, Anish, so what are some of your thoughts on some of those incentives, what they might be, given the use cases?
I'll give you an example. And this might be a bit awkward, but I'm going to describe this. Let's do an A/B testing. Essentially, you have two machine learning algorithms, one having a bunch of data with fully compliant to privacy, and another having partially compliant to privacy. Essentially, what you want is to, in a regulatory sense, is price this, okay? So essentially what you're saying is, if you don't actually meet a regulatory requirement, there's a penalty that's a function of the privacy leakage, okay? Does that make sense? So this aligns the incentives. So essentially, I can actually have an automated market maker. So if you look at the Ocean protocol, there's an automated market maker that's being used to price data, right? I can use it, flip the other way around and say, okay, I have a machine learning algorithm, which is not really compliant. And I go to the market and actually price it. And now there's a regulator, which I imagine you are, you say to who actually builds this model and says, look, I'm going to be doing this, okay? If you break privacy to this extent, this is the price you need to pay. If you break privacy, it could be a varying grade of anything, right? But effectively what you're doing right now, what you have is, in the UK, you have ICO, right? ICO means Information Commissioner's Office, and James would actually could explain it. So when you talk to the ICO, I've actually talked to them multiple times. They are not the, okay, polite, let me rephrase it. In any world, if you can imagine, you never get the smartest of the people in the world come and work for the government, okay? It's a misaligned incentive problem, okay? Apologies for putting it that way, right? So that's an arbitrage that's already lost. We lost the game, the real start of it. Now, let's imagine this, and then we go to them and we describe to them. The only tool they have is they charge you $50,000 or whatever that is. Now they've flipped up to 5%, right? Imagine we had a mechanism by which we can scale it from wherever we start to 5%, but the pricing is the thing that drives your machine learning model, how much is going to be penalized. So now there's a real arbitrage, okay? you have an arbitrage between your machine learning model priced against real market versus, at the same time, so you have two curves, and the place where it intersects, that really you have zero gain. So you are really forced to think really hard before you play this game. So I'll stop now.
That's super interesting. So I'll stay quiet for the moment and leave my questions for later. I'd love to go to James on his thoughts on what Anish just shared.
So as you said, ARKA, there's a lot to unpack there. I think I guess I have two conflicting thoughts. One is we need to keep it simple, because I think if anything in today's world, we are overcomplicating the decisions that we expect normal people to make about their privacy and about their finances. And so the more we complicate this, I think the less likely we are to get wins for individuals. That said, the other view is the genie's out of the bottle. And so, perhaps the desire to keep things simple is a little naive, and we need to deal with the fact that the genie is out of the bottle and start to control it in ways that we can. I would agree as well. Regulation is almost always a game of catch up. When it's not, when regulators actually create market structures themselves, you can often end up with a lot of unintended consequences. So I think that's probably the right approach. It would be good to see the regulatory community engage even more than they have done in this, and be open to exploring ways to better use data and to better control the use of data. I think that the sandboxes that we're seeing from some of the regulation or innovation hubs, depending on where you are, what they're called, I think these are a great step, and I'd encourage any firm to make better use of these, because I think we're starting to see, as regulators get exposed to more technology and more ways that data is being used, they're able to formulate better policy in response to that.
Fantastic. I love how balanced that answer is, James. Well done.
Unhelpfully balanced, probably, because they're too.
No, actually, no. It's actually, I think I would say it the other way. I think it's very healthily balanced, because I think it shows the compelling arguments on both, the desire to keep it as simple as possible, but also the strain that Anish and now you have described that exists in kind of, first of all, accepting that complexity just exists because of the system that we are in. And then while we want to tend towards simplicity, we have to accept the complexity that exists in order to be able to approach it. And then eventually, hopefully, we may not be around to see that world, but maybe someday it will be actually simple. But, that's why we're here, like putting these ideas out there. That's fantastic, James. And I want to go to Vinay next. I'm sure you have a few thoughts on what Anish and James just shared.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to touch on sort of Anish's points about incentives, which I think are spot on. Any new model is going to work because it got the incentives right. I think either Warren Buffett or Charlie Munger that said, if you can work on incentives, don't work on anything else.
Show me an incentive. Yeah, Munger, it's Charlie Munger.
Okay. Yeah, I completely agree, right? Like, and I think that's the key to kind of unlocking this whole system. And just putting, I also think that, the regulatory bodies, I totally agree, they're going to take some time to catch up. So I think we should just put them aside and try to figure out, okay, what are the right incentives? Just assuming we can figure out the regulatory part to get all the different players in this ecosystem working in a way that we want. So let's just hone in on this sort of ML use case around financial data, right? And say you've got a bunch of startups that are building these ML models. And so there are two use cases around data and these ML models. One, these ML models need data to be trained, and these startups may not have the data for training. And B, once the models are reasonably trained, they want to sort of apply that model to a new consumer, and they may not have the data for that new consumer either, right? So I was thinking about incentive mechanisms for both of those. So for the first one, I do wonder if there's a way whereby, anonymized data can be shared with companies um, without compromising the privacy of the user. I don't know if this is possible. I've heard that it's being done a little bit, but I wonder if that's a way to get around this. So for training, you need like very large data sets. So could you have one company that sort of gathers this data from consumers? They're very open that we're going to pay you for this data, and we're going to resell it in an anonymized way to various startups for training, right? So that's one model that may work. I haven't thought deeply about it. And then the second thing is, so if a company, say, has a trained model and they want to apply it to a particular consumer and they don't have the consumer's data, again, you could have an aggregator that comes in and says, we're not going to give you the data. You can give us your model and we'll run it on the encrypted data, right? Like, and so it's just like kind of like the idea of Lambda in programming, like you pass around functions, you can pass around the model and instead of passing around the data. So these are two potential ways that I see that you can have well-aligned incentives. And in every case, the consumer knows, like, here's what's happening with your data, right? And there's complete transparency, and hopefully these systems may allow some degree of privacy as well.
Anish, would love to go back to you and get your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be the cynic in the room. So as the guy who's actually been involved in building all these things, so I'm deeply cynical. So, okay, so just to go back to the sharing of data problem, right? I mean, yes and no. So the yes part is, in theory, if you had NPCs, yes, we could actually have pieces and pieces and pieces. You could do, ML model trained across all the pieces. None of the guys actually have the whole thing, but the end machine learning, essentially it's a matrix multiplication. You have slices of columns of a matrix being aggregated. You have an MPC that actually does it. So your machine learning, even simpler, you can think of like a Markov model, like each state update is being updated by. So let me take a use case. Like imagine a use case where I buy 10 things across 10, not 10 or 3, like Amazon, somebody else and somebody else. And each of them don't want to share the data with each other, but they are willing to allow that particular state update to be possible. It is possible in certain instances where there's enough of value in the situation to do that. Current machine learning models that are there, there are a couple of them. I'm not going to go into details, but pretty much all of them. This question that's being asked, the obvious question I asked at the start of the conversation, is this: what is the economic value of the arbitrage, right? This is like the biggest question that's open. And there's always a bootstrapping problem. There's a 3-dimensional bootstrapping problem that is fundamental to data marketplaces. There's a question of identity. So every person or every entity needs to have an identity so they can actually have X. Second is every data set needs to have an identity. And then set of all transactions that can happen on a data set, right? So this is an n by m into k matrix, which is incredibly large, okay? And as you all know, doing any transactions on an incredibly large matrix is very expensive. So we might have to really decide what would be the data set that we really want to. I'm being kind of constrained by the economic reasoning in terms of how costly it is and what's the cost of actually doing this machine learning, what's the arbitrage you can have. Also looking at some MPC libraries and things like that that can realistically work in the framework in that sense. And then think, okay, who are the people who could actually collaborate on this thing? And once you have that, maybe, if there is enough of value accrued in the ecosystem, we might be able to set this thing up as a data commons in some sense of speaking, and allow people to come in. And then, the second thing Vinay was kind of rightly pointing out is this challenge of, this is the cloud paradigm. It's like send computer data, right? That's the only way you can actually do this, right? So if you said this to the old set, in the old paradigm, you would go, no way in hell, right? So if you are from the API-CH world, which I happen to be like a donkey's years ago, there is such a thing doesn't happen. Right? It's, this is like a passive versus active versus passive thing. Active meaning every compute needs to be validated. Passive means MapReduce kind of thing. You send the compute, you assume a bunch of them to go down, but you still aggregate it. You do an expansion function. So the thing I was about to say is that was very conditional. And there are there are specific things that are there, example, differential frequency, right? It's very, very constrained. And I wanted to add 2 small things to actually paint this picture in a slightly better hue of color, and then I will keep my mouth shut. So the thing I wanted to say is GANs, right? Adversarial networks, right? It's very, very useful. It's useful in two ways. One is to synthesize synthetic data. So I could take a GAN, give it a bunch of data, train it, and then it could produce synthetic data, right? So it doesn't break privacy. But at the same time, if it's efficient enough, if you could actually break the differential privacy paradigm, then that is broken. So there is a very, very tight bound between two bounds, right? One where GANs are useful and one where GANs can't work, because information theoretically, if they break differential privacy, GAN is no longer a GAN. It's like a, what do I call a crystal ball? Okay, now I should stop.
That's fantastic. I love that. I feel like we could probably just keep this particular conversation going for another hour pretty easily. Thank you, Anish. Thank you, Vinay. Thank you, James. This is fascinating. So I have scheduled this for 75 minutes because I thought, given the participants, that we might the conversation might get quite interesting, and it has. So what I'll do now is I'll cut to our friend SIRTAJ, who has been quite the star through this festival. It's kind of like there was this joke at one of the Oscars. I remember which one was it, that Jude Law was like pretty much in every movie, and I feel like SIRTAJ is our Jude Law for this festival. He's in pretty much every session featured somehow, and we love it because SIRTAJ is helping us think through the product implications of a lot of these different use cases that we are looking at. So SIRTAJ, just continuing with the theme that we have here of not necessarily skepticism, but the challenges that lie ahead of us in terms of being able to bring these marketplaces into the world. I think Anish had a really nice description there of the specific constraints and parameters that will need to be worked through in order to create these potential economic data-based loops that are actually generating net positive value. What do you see as kind of like the key principles and tenets that we need to keep in mind and follow as we think about practically building these kinds of distributed registries, analytics for or solutions for extremely sensitive data classes like health data, like financial data? So what, given the not insignificant amount of research and work that you have done in both these classes of data at this point, what are some of the guidelines, principles we should follow from your perspective? And then I know we have Kouhei-san from Privacy First Design to also share his thoughts with us.
Hey, ARKA, thanks. To answer your question, I'm going to do one of the things I do best, which is try to rehash some of the things that everybody else has just said. So I'm going to take a page from VINAY, James, and Anish here, and I'm going to try to keep it simple in terms of the things, and just what the other gentlemen have already described. But what I see it really is it's a balancing act between the information required, the accuracy of the information, and the privacy, right? For each one of these things. If we're talking about financial data, we're talking about health data. It's definitely a big challenge. But I think we've all established we wouldn't be here if we didn't see the need for it, right? So like in terms of just key principles, key tenets. I always think about it, or I like to think about it as that balancing act between those two things, because as we've seen, if you share the granularity, like fully granular data and all of those things, if that's given up, even if that data is yours, if it belongs to you, once it's out there, right? If your database is exposed, then whether or not you have the rights to that data, anybody else can pick it up, right, and use it. And we've seen heard lots of examples of where different companies are collecting different data and things like that. There's also, there are issues. One of the things I think about a lot are, the issues of accuracy. I'm not as much of an expert in financial data, but it's a big thing in other areas as well. Thinking about health, thinking about agriculture, thinking about many other places as well. Is what is the level of accuracy of data? What is our confidence in that data? I imagine, for me, it's a direct extension of what a credit score is supposed to be. maybe what his original intent was. And, I feel like it's gotten changed quite a bit since then. And then to the point that everyone has brought up, I mean, like I think we all value privacy, right? And being able to balance that well across these things, right? The point that I think Anish was just making around, like, if you want really, if you want to provide like really good analytics, right, that takes effort, right? And then it's way easier to just give somebody a spreadsheet of everything, right? But then, and so, like, to maintain that privacy and put in all the effort, like it's one of those things that we work on, and I think about a lot and across many different spaces in terms of what it is that we are ultimately providing, and what those analytics and whatever that information is, whatever that end consumer of that information is, whatever they're looking for, how do we balance those things? So it comes back to that balancing act.
Thank you very much, SIRTAJ. Maybe we can go ahead and share Kouhei-san's thoughts. And then after that, we have Gary Fan from Gateway Bank. And that is also a very interesting conversation, because we've talked a lot about financial data, and banks are pretty much the custodians of not just our actual finances, but also of our financial data. So we had a little chat with Gary about that. So SIRTAJ, maybe we can hear from Kouhei-san about the privacy guidelines that he is thinking about, and then we can I'll set up the conversation with Gary, and then we'll circle back to our live panelists.
Great. Hi, Kouhei-san. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your thoughts today.
Thank you.
Would you like to introduce yourself first?
Sure. It's a very great honor to be invited to this opportunity. My name is Kouhei. I'm a co-founder of the Privacy by Design Lab. We are leading the developing a privacy culture in our countries as a not-for-profit organization. I've been working on some of the technical space, such as the blockchain and data. At this moment, I committed to help the companies, the public institutions, get involved in the privacy space. So thank you.
Hey, great. So first question I want to ask you today, as we think about utilizing an individual's financial data and creating a privacy vault or a data vault of that financial data, whether it's held by their bank or another institution, what are some of the privacy concerns that you foresee?
Yeah, that's very serious at this time, because a lot of companies try to use the financial data for the specific purpose, such as the targeted customers, or making a creditworthiness scoring, or making an algorithmic approach. I think this is the issues of the privacy is very critical, such as we collected the financial data to use for other purposes, not just for the financial authentication, but also we use it for the marketing purpose. A good example is in our country, Japan has a lot of banking companies that try to use personal data for the marketing purpose at this moment. When Japanese banking big company is to try to cooperate with the advertisement agencies to establish the joint ventures to use the customer data. Even they said it's anonymous data, but we are not sure whether they are actually anonymous or not. Because in this space, not even anonymous, to the companies, they use the data for the other purposes. They can easily to integrate those data for the kind of identified data for the specific purpose. So this is a very big issue, and we have to be worried about the privacy concerns. So the banking is a very strict regulations at this moment, but their business has been eroded by the losing the share from the fintech business. So they have to change their ideas. That's why they are settled to use the marketing purpose for the financial data. But this is a very big paradox at this times. And for the user side, it's very hard to understand what the purpose is been established, created for the banking sectors. Even in the privacy policies, they are describing their purposes, why they are collecting data, what is the purpose for your data being used. Mm-hmm. Those purposes are related to the customer benefit. That is good, but every time it's not be related for that. So this is a very big concern for the privacy purpose. Besides, we are very worried about the data, where it is, such as your data has been administrated in other countries. Even though you are running the business in Japan, your data is on China, your data is on Hong Kong, where it's out of the regions. So this is the very big issues, and the Japanese Privacy Commissioner is being concerned at this time. So this kind of the thing is the privacy issues in terms of the using personal data, especially the financial related the information, I assume.
So then, as we think about designing a data vault or any application, where we want to, use this type of data, what are some of the privacy first principles that a company or programmers or anyone else should keep in mind? Or even, what are some of the key things that they should consider, especially as it relates to, getting users' consent for using that data?
Sure. We've been working on the privacy policy matters besides the consent making. This is a very critical one because a lot of company is collecting the personal data through the agreement in between the users and the data controller through the privacy policies and consent processing. However, the issues so far is the privacy policies and consent mechanism is very complicated. The most of the people is not checking all the privacy policy because it's been taking the time, a lot of hard to understanding. This is a very big issue, and it takes 20 or 30 minutes to complete the reading. So this is not the actual contract with them. So we have to define of the experiences of the consent management, such as we have to avoid the deceptive approach, such as the sales promotions. I used to work at the e-commerce business. They are trying to push in the customer behaviors to come to your purchase. In these cases, the hyped communication, such as you are making a purchase during the specific terms, such as you can buy it is a very high discount in 2 hours, but actually this discount is continuous after the sales. So this is a deceptive one. In some of the consent case, that's something happens. So a lot of the people is not actually knows what is your data is used for the purpose, but they are rushing it to check buttons of the consent. So this is not fair. So this is a very big issue this time. We have to make more interactive communications. A good example, the IKEA has been started to the more interactive communication with the customers. They know that a lot of customer is not leading the privacy policy. So that's why they are putting some of the processes to ask for the customers whether they can agree with the customers to use their data. So this is a very natural purposes. This kind of a concept has been coded by the Amazon, Apple. So they are leader of the privacy space at this time. And Steve Jobs has been saying almost 10 years ago at the conference that we have to make a consent again and again if the customer is not agree to use the data. So this is a very natural. So we have to go back to the basic principle to use the customer data.
Hey, great. Thank you so much. That's really fascinating. I really appreciate your insight and all the work that you're doing in this space. And thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. That's very honored to have a conversation with all this time.
Well,
right, Arka,
big
back
thanks
to
to Kouhei-san for those insights. What I'm going to do now is, instead of going to Gary, I'm just going to go back to our panel here. Anish and Vinay are here. James is back also. I'd love for maybe starting with Vinay. Have you ask a question of any of the other panelists that you think hasn't been addressed yet? And then we know that some questions are coming in from the audience also.
Yeah, one of the things that, I have been thinking about is this whole idea around, experimentation that's required in this space, right? Like there's so many open questions around how to balance, things like privacy with the ability to share data. And I think we're not going to solve it like theoretically. The only way we can solve it is sort of, go out and build and see, what works, see what the incentives are, like how deeply do we want to go down the privacy route versus making sharing a little bit more easy. I would love to hear from, either Anish or James, right? Like, are there clear pitfalls that need to be avoided so that as we explore this space, we can, find the right solution sooner rather than later? Are there sort of like known bad patterns that you've seen which will never work? I'm very curious about that.
I feel like that's one probably better suited for niche, to be honest, on the technical side at least.
Okay, I'll give it a go and give you one or two examples where things have gone bad, why it could go bad, and then I will give you instances where things could be good. So this is based on a couple of data marketplaces I've designed, and because I spend a lot of time doing data marketplaces. And one of the challenges you literally see straight up is once you share data, instances where it becomes a true lemon market, that's a pretty bad place to do experiments. Let me explain one. I remember I was talking about 23andMe, right? That is a case of a true lemon market. Effectively, what happens is, imagine there's a situation, there's a healthcare insurance provider. I know 23andMe, SNPs are pretty low. You don't have the kind of resolution you want to make decisions. But yes, even then, even still, you might be able to see certain inherited diseases coming down, right? And what could happen is they would have a better probability estimates than 23andMe can have. You know what I'm saying, right? Because as an insurer, they have better data set. So given a marker, what are the odds that I would have a particular disease would be estimated better than 23andMe, better than me, by the insurance provider? That's a complete lemon market in that sense. If such experiments happen, they could do true cherry picking. Cherry picking in the sense like you pick all the ones that are very cheap, really price everybody that has any risk completely out of the market. And that completely defeats the purpose of insurance, right? So this set of examples are pretty bad one. But on the other side, we could actually have examples where we could improve certain things. So, imagine we are thinking about, manufacturing stupid phones, right? Sorry, it's not stupid, but you know what I'm saying. So, your Flextronics, you talk to Apple, Apple talks to Flextronics, Flextronics goes to the next. So, in that supply chain, a machine learning optimization and kind of optimizing the risk of non-delivery, absolutely useful for everybody, right? So right now, I have 30 days between Flextronics and Apple, and 60 days between Flextronics and the guys who give the Sapphire to the front phrase of thing, and it goes up all the way up. Up to 30 to 40% of the overall cost of manufacturing is indirectly the cost of finance. That is a place where machine learning could reduce your risk. Society could have a positive upside. So, there you go. Two examples, two very different ones. One is possibly very positive, other one is terrible.
That's great. I love it. Thank you.
Anish, staying with you, what question would you have for any of our panelists, including SIRTAJ?
I had a very open question. I am one of the people who think a lot, so I am probably lost in the cloud of, and occasionally I come down and I'll go build and then go back up. So you can't live in the world of either one of them. So my question to everyone is like, have they found a situation where they think they are still in touch with reality, but are able to abstract themselves away enough to think about a problem to actually, have some use about it. So to me, that's a very hard problem. The thing is like, James was kind of describing, oh, look, doing the simplest thing is the best thing to do. Completely agree. And that is the basis of cryptography. Like I come from a world of cryptography. I have a couple of papers on bringing protocols, right? So, anything that's complex, complexity is the enemy of security. But unfortunately, we can't simplify society. I mean, this is why I said, like, you go in your head, you can simplify and do abstractions. And in reality, you have to deal with reality. You can't actually, have a phone in the way you want. You can't just say to a phone, I want a BCI, brain computer interface, and I just want everything to go to my brain. It doesn't happen. In a mental model, you can have that. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. So my question to everybody in the panel is the kind of question, this is a very complex space. What is your mental model in looking at problems? Do you take a very practical, pragmatic approach where you have to face complexity, or you go to a very abstract space where you have very simple models and you're able to enforce things the way you want?
That's a great question. Why don't we have quick lightning round style answers from James, Vinay, and then SIRTAJ? What a fantastic question. Thank you.
It's a really good question, and I'm sorry we don't have time to really do it justice. Lightning round answer. I try and keep my feet grounded in reality and pragmatism. Does that mean I make the best decisions? No, but we try and get stuff done.
Yeah, I would say exactly the same. I take a very practical approach to these things, and find sort of that next incremental step that we can take to make the overall solution a little bit better, right? Rather than sort of a boil the ocean approach. And that's why I kind of love that there are a bunch of these new companies that have started that are exploring different kinds of data economic models. And none of them are perfect, but they're out there, they're working, they're making money. Like I was just talking to Orko the other day about this company called Autonomo, which basically aggregates and sells data around autonomous cars, and which is then aggregated by them, and then it's used by so many different companies to train their own models. So I love looking at companies like that, which they may not be perfect, they still have some rough edges, but they figured out a use case that works, and they figured out models that work for all of the players in the ecosystem.
Thank you, Vinay. SIRTAJ, any thoughts from you?
I'll say that my favorite way to think about it. Anytime we try to tackle a problem, as the work that we're doing with the Lydian platform, with the data economics company, we're always looking for new use cases and things like that. And anytime we come across something, or anytime I come across something, a new challenge, my favorite way to look at it, and I don't get enough time to do this, is to really strip away all of the what we know or what we're told, or try to strip away all the assumptions. That's how I try. I do my best. I feel like I do my best work, and I have my best breakthroughs when we're able to do that. Because, and to be very honest, there's so many times where I take things away that should not have been, and I have and you have to have someone who is an expert there and there to tell you that no, this is critical for this reason. But at the same time, I feel like if there are also a lot of things there are a lot of assumptions that we make when we look at existing models that say that, oh, this is how it's done, so if I'm going to iterate on this, you carry a lot of those assumptions with you. So I always find that my best work and my best ideas come from that point where we're able to look at a challenge and say, like, okay, if I were to build this from scratch, it's also a lot of fun, to be honest. When you're like, hey, here's this thing and I want to build it from scratch, how would I do it? And is it always? It's never 100% right. Sometimes I'd be happy if I'm 25% right. But then and when you actually get it going and try to put it to work, right? That's when all these other things come into play. I mean, that's for me, that's just another fun part of it's not the game, but just the process, right? Is going through that whole thing. In reality, to what both James and Vinay are saying, it's rare you get that opportunity to look at a problem like that. Most of the things we look at, and most of the things I've seen in my career so far, it's like, here's the issues, here's where we want to get to, how do we get from A to B, right? And you make it happen.
Thank you, SIRTAJ. That's wonderful. So just doing a time check, we're at time. Pretty much. Here's what I'd like to do, if that's okay with our panelists. James, if you have a question that you would like to ask, we'd love to do that. If the panelists can be with us for about 5 more minutes or so, I would love to address at least one audience question. And then what I'll do is to wrap up this session, I will play what we spoke with Gary about in terms of the relationship of banks with users and as the custodian of not just finances, but also their financial data, because a lot of it is a bit dependent on that. So, going to James real quick. James, did you have a question that? Sure.
So I'm going to chuck out a question, but then I'm afraid I have to drop off straight after that because I have another meeting I can go straight into. So my question is, we've talked a lot about privacy and about data protection. The other angle to this, which I think could warrant an entirely new session, is competition. How do we use personal data to actually create more effective competition amongst the providers of financial services, for example? So one to think about, and ARKA, maybe one for the next festival.
Absolutely. So let's get some thoughts from Vinay or Anish, whoever wants to take that. And James, we will have all this recorded and you'll have the clips. So we will find out what the answer was. Thank you.
Cheers, guys. Bye-bye.
Anish or Vinay, does one of you want to maybe address James's question?
I'm happy to give it a go. I do love this idea of data exchanges. That's sort of very similar to the stock exchange, where so stocks get traded freely, and there's a sort of wonderful price discovery mechanism that happens, and then there's a lot of competition around that price discovery. So a lot of people are trying to figure out what the correct price the data is. So I do wonder if we can bring that same concept to data as well, where there are these data exchanges, different companies can sort of bid for that data, and that price is like constantly fluctuating, but still do it in a way that is either anonymized or ensures some privacy, or when the data is shared, like the consumers sort of know about it and can benefit. So I think that those are some of the best ways to really drive competition in the space.
Can I chip in for
Please,
my 2 cents worth? So Ocean actually has this mechanism. I kind of described that I've been involved in from early on from the design. So so the situation here is like, I kind of described the problem in a slightly different way. I kind of described this in a 3-dimensional matrix, right? So a set of all humans or all entities in the world, set of all data in another world, and set of all operations in that world. And you need to actually price what of what is true. And then what you do is take that operation, call it a thingy token, put it on a decentralized exchange where you can do an automated market maker to find a price for this thing. To me, that's a speculative way of finding the price. That's one of the models that exists. And the challenge I kind of see in all of these models is the following, right? We have a very, very different trust model in the structure. And there is a problem of rent seeking. Okay, let me try, break it down. So essentially, I know when, our friend Vinay actually, works with. And I'm just saying, just imagine they have a peer-to-peer mechanism to some sense. But in general, what you have is like a barter effectively requires coincidence of wants and geographic locality. Okay, essentially, if I wanted to do barter, my want should meet Vinay's wants, and we both should be in a place where we can do this. And there's a store and forward mechanism that exists. The store and forward mechanism is a thing that actually allows everything being happen. And then you flip the whole store and forward into a supply chain optimization problem, right? And this applies in every level of thinking, right? And that is essentially in the financial side, that's what's actually happening. And effectively, when the store and forward happens, who gains the most? And in general, it's the person in the middle who gains the most. My real question to everybody is, can we actually have a model where, somehow there is this, thing in the middle, or, whatever that thing is, either we should have a decentralized architecture, or we should have an incentive to pay back to society, right? Rather than just aggregate everything and pay back to society. If that were possible, I would love to see that happen.
That's fantastic. I guess that does relate a little bit to one of our audience questions. So Anish, I will just address that towards you, which is any comments on this new FTC stuff on AI and inclusion diversity? Strikes me as an echo of James's comment on the bank manager with potential implicit bias. How can we make sure some of these new systems don't penalize on race, gender, etc., which I think can be extended to your point of, how can it potentially be used to create positive long-term societal benefits?
So I put it's one of the rare instances where I'm on a panel and I'm not the only brown skin guy. So I have two things against me. One, I have a brown skin, and second, I have a Muslim surname. And mostly when I'm on a panel, I'm not kidding, I'll be the minority in every way, shape, or form, right? So, and then, the challenge is, like, I fully understand the challenge, right? Just to give you some more context, I don't have two forms of identity with my address on it. So a lot of places I can't, okay? In spite of me paying tons of taxes, I can't because I don't have a driving license. I don't drive, right? So I fully personally understand what discrimination really means. And and I actually was invited by World Economic Forum 2 years ago when they ran a whole bunch of workshops, literally looking at this. And I think two things need to be looked at. One is explainability, right? One of the things that's really, really missing is explainability. So a lot of those machine learning algorithms, especially the class of deep learning ones, nobody really knows what the F is happening inside, right? Yes, Tifali Tisti has this, a very interesting paper called Information Theory of Deep Learning, kind of describes this as compression algorithms or lossy compression. What the F that does mean, right? Can I actually quantify that? Okay, first question. And the other part of it is like, data as such. Again, I'm going to be politically incorrect. Pretty much all the products in the world are currently aimed at a very small demographic. And mostly, I think we are probably, I am assuming by the name of Vinay, he's actually from Kerala as well. So, I am from Kerala. I was born in Kerala and I left like 20 years ago, right? So, when I look at things, and I've reached a point where I can actually have these conversations like this, and I've been on boards of at least a couple of unicorns, and I say to them, like, between 7 and 8 billion people are there. What fractional population are you aiming at this, right? This particular service, product, whatever it is. So unless, in some sense, we have a ability to do normalization, as I call it, I don't see no chance in hell for having any fairness anytime soon. We have no historical data. If you were to, Kerala is a very, in that sense, a very educated place. Like, take some part of India, which is like a bit backward. You will really struggle to train a machine learning model with the data you have on that place right now, right? How would you actually get a data about some Amazonian tribe? We can create some synthetic data. There are some statistical techniques, but the bias that's there, you will never know, right? So I will put my hand up and say, some problems are incredibly hard. These are societal problems. We can't just place the societal problems on machines and say, machine, you solve it. That's an easy way out.
I completely agree with that. And, to express, just one opinion to wrap us up here, I do completely agree. I think that there is a fascination around getting machines to do things that humans have already evolved to do in a really sophisticated manner. I think the interesting frontiers lie when you can optimize what machines can learn and do and what humans can learn and do, and bring that together in a way that is, to put it in a very general way, more than the sum of its parts, so to speak. But to get machines to replicate what we are doing, like that's why I have a problem with the word artificial intelligence, even though it's been around for my entire life, which is the fact that, intelligence already exists. I'm not really sure what the benefits are of creating an artificial version of it. Instead of thinking about how that can be potentially enhanced. And I think this panel was so amazing. I think the content here is riveting, and obviously we'll make it available to everyone. To wrap up, I think this is first of all, I want to thank Anish, I want to thank Vinay, I want to thank SIRTAJ and James and Gary and Kouhei-san. Vinay, what I'm going to do is just address this last question from our audience towards you and get your quick thoughts, given the fact that you have been thinking a lot about personal financial data and how that can potentially be adding more value to our lives. Centralized systems like banks provide a level of assurance and trust to an end consumer, with the notion that their most valuable assets will remain safe, quote unquote. Does this notion break down if we think of a more democratized system of data exchange or the kind of data marketplaces that we are discussing here? So I'd love to hear Vinay's thoughts. And then what we'll do is, since it's related, we'll go to SIRTAJ's conversation with Gary. And if our panelists want to hang out and see what Gary had to say, that's awesome. But we will officially wrap the session up after Vinay's response. So Vinay, bring us home.
Yeah, so as far as this notion that, hey, if I give my data to a bank or some centralized authority, it's going to remain safe, I just question that notion itself. Like, I think that's not true, right? Like, centralized single point of failure systems are more vulnerable to attack and data breaches, and we've seen that from so many systems already, right? Like the Experian hack I was talking about, like 150 million accounts got compromised. And so I think a more open data marketplace will let consumers choose who they want to trust, right? And I think that'll ultimately be better for consumers. There'll be better transparency. They'll get to decide, hey, I want to trust this company or this organization. I don't want to trust this other company, this organization. And I think, that's obviously also with fewer single points of failure, that'll be less susceptible to attack as well. And with that, I just want to say thank you for having me on this panel. It was a lot of fun. Glad I got a chance to participate, learned a lot, and looking forward to future sessions as well.
Thank you, Vinay. It was a pleasure as always. I'm glad we could take one of our phone/hangout conversations and actually record it, and get others to check it out. Thank you. And Anish, any closing thoughts? Thank you so much. It's been wonderful having you here. Thank you so much for your time. I know it's late over there.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. As I said, one of the first times I am in a panel where there are more diversity on the panel than most have seen. And it's an interesting thought that people do normally, literally it's a colonial overhang. People no, I'm not kidding. They decide
right.
for us.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah, and so technology is a great equalizer, and I hope equalization happens in the right direction rather than the other way around.
Thank you, Anish. What a great thought. SIRTAJ, any thoughts from you? If not, then thank you to the audience. I hope you'll stick around to hear Gary's thoughts, because he is working on leading a very innovative bank and is thinking progressively about the kind of solutions that we have discussed here. So SIRTAJ, we'll let you wrap us up along with Gary's thoughts. And Vinay and Anish, thank you once again. And thank you to our audience.
Hey, thank you so much. I guess the last thing I'll say is we spoke a lot about ML and other things like that, and I really like the closing points around that. Hey, ML isn't necessarily the solution. There are fundamental changes. Like when they say, oh, we need better ML, you need a better data set, and what if the data doesn't exist? And there are a lot of other fundamental changes really that are required, and hopefully we can push those along with the technology. So So thank you so much. And let me queue up Gary over here. Hey, Gary. So thanks so much for being here today and joining us. Maybe you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, SIRTAJ. My name is Gary Fan. I'm the Chief Banking Officer at Gateway Bank. Gateway is a community bank based out of Oakland. Today we do business all over California, and just really excited about being at the event. One of the things we're doing is sort of transitioning to a digitized kind of service offering for our clients, and so a lot of the kind of assetization and some of the concepts that you guys have been discussing at the event are of interest to us in the future. So, thanks again for having me, and super excited to talk about some of the subjects today.
Hey, that's great. So here's what I'd like to ask you first. As the value of financial data is increasing, this financial data is being used in different ways. Can you tell us a bit about your thoughts around how banks and individuals can build a better, more mutually beneficial relationship around how that data is used?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. First and foremost, just a quick disclaimer. I do want to say these are all my personal opinions, not the official opinions of Gateway Bank. But with that kind of out of the way, happy to jump right in. So, yeah, I think in the last couple of years, at least the last couple decades, I think a lot of the interaction between banks and customers are a little bit transactional. At least that's the perception at the greater public level. And I think one of the things that is happening, especially with the importance of actual data and what companies are doing with it, is it's starting to shift internally. And we see this already happening in a lot of other industries. When we look at consumer goods, for example, obviously today, there's tech companies collecting information about buying habits of what consumers are purchasing, about what they're searching for online, what they're purchasing on Amazon, and those types of data points are collected. And those particular companies that hold that information are then selling that to other, let's say, manufacturers or people selling products that can better predict what a consumer is looking for. So in that same way, I think banks are also in a similar type of position. We hold a lot less of the information, although some of it is crossover. When we look at credit card statements, banks also have data on what our customers are purchasing, but we also have some more richer data than just transactional data. We have obviously the personal financial information of any customer or business, so we have a better picture of what that person, how they make money, where they make money, what they spend money on, those types of things. So I think the natural evolution of this data is that in the future, banks will be able to more accurately predict what the products and services that make sense for that customer are. And for banks like Gateway, and there's countless others out there, we're looking really for a mutually beneficial relationship. I know there's some banks out there that maybe aren't doing that, but there are a lot of institutions today that are trying to push that as the way that we think we can all grow together. And so the data that exists today, I think the majority of banks are trying their best to secure that data and make sure it's safe. In it, sort of more than that, I think besides kind of self-marketing to those clients and trying to find products that are somewhat related or that lead to one another, I think one of the issues is trying to figure out what the next steps might be, and that kind of comes to a lot of the topics that have been discussed by this event and some of the other presenters. From a personal standpoint, I think a lot of this information is interconnected, and some banks only have some products, and so even though we might think, for example, that a customer is looking to purchase their next vehicle, for example, and we can maybe give them an opportunity to get a car loan with us, we might not have that product. And so if that's the case, that information kind of stops and doesn't go anywhere. Well, in the future, if we think about consumers actually having a better kind of understanding and control over their own data, maybe that data can then be shared by a different institution that does offer something that makes more sense for that particular individual. And then that could that could turn into actual financial benefit for that person, whether that's interest rate reduction in fees, or actually dollars for that particular set of information. Because I can tell you now, banks are paying for that information. We're paying big tech companies like Facebook and Amazon and Google to help us find these new customers. But if the customers themselves own this data themselves, you can really cut out the middleman. And I think that's actually something it's kind of exciting, kind of scary, because I think the powers that be wouldn't necessarily be super happy with that particular model. But sometimes the kind of the momentums of change, that's just where the direction of where we think things are going. So I think there's a lot of value in kind of assetizing that information. And then the other part is sort of, if we give the control of that information to the person that produces it, or the person that owns that information, which should be the actual individual, or in banking scenarios, maybe the company that's the business that we're banking, that particular business owner should own that data. So I think on the larger scheme of things, I think this kind of touches on a point of kind of this mutual trust that we'd like to see kind of come back to this industry. I think with how society's evolved and sort of the evolution of financial services as an industry, I do think, I think things have become more transactional and it's becoming less personal. So the industry does sell this idea that we're your partners, but I think for the most part, it's more, we're just here to help you perform a transaction, and then we can make some money from it. But I think if you think about the origins of this particular industry, in the very beginning, the reason why banks started, I think, was to lend money to individuals or to lend money to businesses, but it was also to kind of establish a longer term trusting relationship with the customer. Because I think the best type of customer for a bank is someone that will grow with them. And in order to establish that type of growth, you really need to create trust there. Because ultimately, I'd like to think of the best bankers as true advisors to someone, right? We're supposed to be here not just helping you figure out what the loan terms are, but we're supposed to help you figure out how to grow your business, how to scale your business, how to spend money the right way, not to waste money, invest in the things that make most sense. And if we can advise an individual or business owner to do that better, then that's actually mutually beneficial for the bank. And I think ultimately that's the type of relationship we want. And so when you think about, again, you think about the concepts of data, I think one thing that's really powerful is, today banks are trusted entities that hold financial information, your personal financial information and information for a company. If we're already doing that today, and you think about assetizing that data, then there might be an opportunity for banks in the future to also be the custodians of the actual data assets themselves, in addition to the raw money and numbers that are associated with a person's sort of financial picture. So I think that's something that's kind of interesting. I think I'm not sure too many banks are thinking about those concepts, but I think that's what makes it exciting. So if we're able to get there from a technology standpoint, I think the possibilities are pretty endless. There's just a lot of applications that we can think about. I'm sure there's a bunch of things we haven't thought about that will come to fruition at a later time. But at least from my opinion, I think those are some of my thoughts on your question.
Hey, Gary, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, and thanks for your time today.
And thank you, SIRTAJ, for all your time and all your effort in helping us make sure that Gary and Kouhei-san's words were able to be broadcast on our session here. And thank you to our audience and to everyone who has supported the festival throughout the week and before. We certainly have hours and hours of fantastic content and discussions that has come out of this festival that we're going to make available on lydion.com, lydion.com, as well as on YouTube and other channels over the next several weeks. And there is a lot more coming from the Data Economics Company throughout the summer and the rest of 2021. So if you haven't already gone to lydion.com and requested access for your insider account or gotten your festival pass, please go do that. The festival pass is going to be active throughout basically forever to get you access to all this great content from the festival and more. And if you want to learn more about our science and technology that is being used to address some of these very interesting opportunities and challenges, you can visit Lydian.com/science. And with that, thank you again, everyone, for hanging with us. We really appreciate it. And we will see everyone again soon.